Welcome everyone, my name is Zach, and in this video I'm going to be putting Tesla's Autopilot system to the test on a windy mountain highway. And for those of you that don't know, Autopilot is not the same as full self-driving. As of August of 2020, full self-driving is an $8,000 option on all Tesla vehicles. But Autopilot comes standard on all Tesla vehicles. And as of right now, Autopilot is really meant to be used on highways, so I think that's the most fair way to test it. I see a lot of people test Autopilot on sketchy backcountry roads, but I think that's a little unrealistic because most people aren't actually going to use it in those scenarios, and I think they kind of set it up for failure. But I totally understand the appeal of testing the limits of a system. However, I want to test Autopilot in a stressful situation that I think is reasonable for it to handle right now, and in a situation that I would actually want to use Autopilot. If Autopilot can't handle a windy mountain highway, how can we expect full self-driving to drive on city streets with so many more variables added to the equation? All right, let's jump into the test and see how it performs. Okay, so I'm testing on I-70 in Colorado. And not only does this highway wind through the Rocky Mountains, but it's also under construction and people tend to drive pretty fast on it. So I think this is a stressful but realistic test for Autopilot. Also, my car is up to date on software as of August of 2020, and the software version that my car is running is 2020.24.6.9. So with 2 downward taps of the gear selector, you can activate Autopilot. And you'll know this is on when the lane markers turn blue on the driver visualization on your screen. So I think the biggest issue with Autopilot on roads like this is the way that it handles curves. Now for the most part, I think it does a pretty good job, and has definitely been improving over time through over-the-air updates. But on some sharper curves at highway speeds, the system just is not aggressive enough. It ends up drifting to the outside of the lane. Now here's an example of what I'm talking about. And on camera, I realize that this doesn't look like a lot, but it makes me very uneasy to be hugging the outside line on a curve like this, because that's opposite of what most drivers would do. Most people hug the inside line when they're going around a corner. So whenever it does this in traffic, I end up getting pretty tense. And if you've used Autopilot on a road like this, I'm gonna guess that you've had a similar experience. And I think this is actually a safety issue that Tesla needs to address. Here's another example where the curve in the road gets a little sharper and the car just drifts toward the outside lane. It seems like the car picks a line into the curve and doesn't want to correct itself. So if a curve gets sharper than anticipated, it allows itself to just drift toward the outside rather than turning sharper into the curve and correcting itself. Which Tesla probably does for comfort so that the car is not swerving around within the lane. Which I totally understand, but it's also not very comfortable to have your car drifting toward the outside of a lane and have the car next to you a foot away. So for me personally, this is an area that Tesla really does need to work on in order for me to feel more comfortable using the system on roads like this. I actually wish that the car wouldn't always drive straight down the center of the lane either. I wish there was some form of bias that was built in. For example, if you're in the fast lane, I wish that the car would center itself slightly to the left in the lane, since there's going to be no traffic on your left side. Again, I think this is how most people actually drive, especially if you're on a narrow section of road or in a construction zone. And that brings me to a similar issue that was probably the sketchiest moment during this test. Here I am in the slow lane entering a construction zone, and you can see that the road starts to curve to the right, and at the same time, a big truck comes up on my left right on the center line, and because I saw that the curve in the road was getting sharper, I knew that my car was going to drift even closer to the truck on the left, so I just took control. And I think this is another great example of where I think the car just needs to react faster and turn sharper in instances like this, and ideally bias itself slightly toward the right side of the lane since I'm in the slow lane, or at least be able to shift within its lane when the car detects objects encroaching on it, which I know is something the car can do because last year Tesla added a feature where when you're passing a semi-truck on the left, it actually shifts over slightly to the left within your lane to give the truck more room. Now on another note, during this test, I was very impressed with the car's ability to read the lines. Given that there's a lot of construction on the road right now, there were a lot of really challenging spots. For example, in this section right here, there were 3 different colors of pavement with 2 borders that could also be mistaken for lines, plus there was a bunch of glare from the sun, and in some cases there was even a shadow from the center barricade obstructing view of the left line. And Autopilot had no issues whatsoever locking on to the actual lines, and I thought that was pretty impressive. And here's another spot where there was a ton of glare on the road, with mixed pavement and awkward shadows, and the car behaved perfectly. So historically, one of the areas that I've had problems with Autopilot is when lanes open up or close on a highway. It appears that the way Autopilot is programmed is that it's just searching for the two lines and trying to center the car between them. And in normal driving, this makes total sense. But when you have a lane opening up or closing, you don't really want the car to be centered between the lines. Here's an example from a few weeks ago of what I'm talking about. You can see on the screen that the car is struggling to find where the line on the right-hand side of the road is, and then it swerves over to try and center itself. Now, for the most part, this isn't really a safety issue. It's just really annoying to have your car swerving around like this for no reason. And can also make you look like a jerk if a car is entering the highway and trying to merge in, and it looks like you're swerving over to block them. And if you have a dotted line like you do right here as the lane opens up, then this will never be a problem because there's always a line for the car to look at and know not to cross. But here in Colorado, you don't always have that, and sometimes the lane will just widen before a lane divider shows up. So depending on where you live and how they mark their roads, this may or may not be a problem. And it doesn't really seem like that hard of a problem for Tesla to fix. In these instances, you would probably just want the car to focus on the lane markers on the left side and try to maintain a certain distance from that, so that you're not swerving over and trying to center yourself in a huge lane that's ending anyway. And this is a pretty inconsistent problem with Autopilot, because while I was performing this test, I never actually had a problem with it. And it seems to be more of an issue on straight, more typical highways. I was actually really impressed with the way it handled this situation right here. There's an exit opening up on the right-hand side with no lane marker on a very sharp turn, and the car performed flawlessly. It very clearly hugs the left lane marker and has no issues. I just wish that the car would be more consistent and handle this the same way every time this situation comes up. As a little bonus, I've got a couple Autopilot tips on things that weren't abundantly clear to me when I first started using the system. First up is the best way to change lanes. Since Autopilot doesn't change lanes for you like Full Self-Driving does, you have to take the car out of Autopilot in order to change lanes. And there are 4 ways to get out of Autopilot. First, if you press the brake at all, then Autopilot will disengage. But if you're just trying to change lanes, you probably don't want to do this because then your brake lights come on and you start slowing down and it's just annoying. Second, you can press up on the stalk on the right-hand side of the steering wheel, and that will disengage Autopilot as well. But again, unless you're pressing the accelerator pedal, you're going to start slowing down immediately. Third, you can disable Autopilot by aggressively steering. You will have to fight the wheel a little bit, but if you do grab it and turn quickly, it will disable Autopilot. Now, the fourth and final way is actually the best when you're just trying to change lanes. If you turn your signal light on and then move the wheel, Autopilot will disable way easier. And when you do it this way, the car actually just changes over to adaptive cruise control, so you maintain the same speed. The car just isn't steering for itself anymore. So you can easily change lanes and turn Autopilot back on, and you don't have to adjust the speed again. The other quick Autopilot tip is that if you swipe up or down with the steering wheel control knob on the right, it'll increase or decrease the speed in increments of 5, so you don't have to do it individually, which can take a while. And then you can also just touch the speed limit sign on the center display, and that will instantly change your set speed to the speed limit. So overall, the system performed pretty well during this test. But as I noted, it's not perfect and there is some room for improvement. But I think this is a pretty stressful test for the system. I'm sure some people will say I'm crazy and that Autopilot and Full Self-Driving are perfect, and I'm overly critical. But if you feel totally comfortable having your car behave the way that it did in a few of these instances, then I don't think I want to be a passenger with you driving. And I understand that on video some of these things may not look very significant, but I can assure you that there were a few times that I was pretty uneasy and ready to take over, including the one time that I actually did. But I do really like Autopilot. I did a 4,000 mile road trip across the US, and I was using Autopilot 95% of the time, and it was amazing. But you have to understand its limits and anticipate situations where the car might struggle and be ready to take over at any moment. The other great thing is that with over-the-air updates, the system's getting better all the time. I've had my car for about 10 months now, and I've definitely noticed significant improvements in Autopilot over that time. And I'm really excited to watch the system evolve, and we'll continue to test on this road to gauge whether or not the system has improved in these situations.
But that's all for today. Hit the like button and consider subscribing if you enjoyed the video and want to learn more about living with an electric vehicle. But regardless, thanks for watching, and see you next time.